Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that this week's episode is brought to you by my new online course, Become a Superhuman. And yes, it sounds exactly like the title of the podcast, but this is actually an online course where we go into the various aspects of improving your health, specifically your endocrine health. More specifically, getting your testosterone up to the optimal levels. Now, whether you're a male or a female, as we've learned in numerous episodes of the show, testosterone is the ultimate feel-good motivation, improved health, improved fitness, improved body composition, super drug. Okay, so everything from your mood to your recovery time and everything in between is affected by your body's endocrine health. And what my team and I have done is we've actually taken years of my own self-experimentation, years of research, every possible literature and study we could find, and we've condensed it into a simple 3 to 4 hour program that you can follow along and make simple, safe, and easy adjustments to your lifestyle to improve your endocrine health. Now, as listeners of this podcast, you can get a very special discount by visiting jle.vi/T. That's jle.vi, just like my name, /T for testosterone. Hey there, super friends, and welcome to today's show. You guys, today we are joined by one of the top names in the world of yoga. Now, in the past, you guys know that we've done episodes on meditation and ayurveda, so it really only seemed fitting that we would round out this trifecta and discuss yoga, especially since yoga has seen such an incredible renaissance in the last decade. And in many ways, it's really the go-to for tens of millions of people who are looking to improve their health, their lives, their emotional lives, and their performance. With a BS in medicinal plant biology and nutrition, my guest today also has a master's in acupuncture and oriental medicine and a specialty in sports medicine and orthopedics. She's also an expert in how holistic medicine and yoga come together. Now, she teaches vinyasa yoga and leads teacher trainings in her very own therapeutic style of yoga called yoga medicine. Now, in addition to all of this, you should note that she's written 2 books, one called Optimal Health for a Vibrant Life, and the second called Meditate Your Weight. And she's also served as the acupuncturist at Nike's world headquarters for the last 5 years. So definitely a woman who knows just about everything there is to know about health as it relates to East meets West. Now, in this episode, I wanted to talk about all things holistic medicine, from yoga to acupuncture to chi and even chakras. And I wanted to understand how you can use them to improve yourself and your life. It's a great episode, and we really cover a ton of bases. We start to understand why yoga is so powerful, what it can do to benefit your life, and how you can go about implementing it and balancing it out with other things such as meditation and exercise. I definitely learned a ton during this episode. I had a great rapport with the guest, as you can tell. We really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure that you will as well. So without any further delay, let me present to you Ms. Tiffany Cruikshank. Tiffany Cruikshank, welcome to the show. It is such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure. I've really been trying to get someone on the show to talk to us about yoga. I mean, I know we've done Ayurveda before. We've done a little bit on meditation. We haven't managed to get yoga. So I'm really excited to talk to you about that.
Cool. I'm excited too.
Yeah. So Tiffany, I understand that yoga has actually been your life's work since you were like an itty bitty little person. So trace us through your journey and what you're up to and how you got to where you are today and how you discovered this passion of yours.
Yeah, I actually was pretty young. I was 14 years old, and I was actually a little bit of a troublemaker. My parents sent me off on a wilderness program, and there was an herbalist there who would take me out on plant walks. And, as a 14-year-old girl, I think, and I'm sure boys experience this too, but as a 14-year-old, feeling really lost and uncomfortable in my skin. Learning how to survive first was really empowering. And then learning how to heal and help people and use plants as medicine was a really big kind of initial step for me of kind of finding what I wanted to do in life. And when I got back, I kept seeing this little sign that said yoga and a phone number, because at the time there weren't any yoga studios really around in much of any of the country, really. And so I started going, and I had always been really athletic. So, I enjoyed the physicality of it, but there always seemed like there was something more. I wasn't really quite sure what it was, but it really intrigued me. And little did I know I would spend my life studying and teaching it from there. I continued to study and apprentice with an herbalist. I went and finished my high school and started college when I was 16. I got my pre-med undergrad in medicinal plant biology and nutrition. And then I went straight on into Chinese medicine school and on to get a specialty in sports medicine, and did all sorts of different fun things linking the yoga together. For me, they're not really separate paths. It's always been kind of one kind of interest for me in health and wellness, and the fusion of yoga with holistic medicine and Chinese medicine has always been something that really intrigued me from early on, of, really being able to help people. I love medicine, and I did look at going into Western medicine briefly, and all sorts of ayurveda and all sorts of different types and styles. I really was intrigued with this kind of ability to help people really refine their lives, really optimize their lives and their health. And, for me, yoga is a big part of that, this capacity to bring it into both a physical and a mental realm. And then also the, holistic side of what we eat and what we put into our bodies. And it's always been really intriguing to me.
Yeah. So I guess many people would ask many different questions about, who your guru was and stuff like that. The question I want to know is about your learning process. I mean, walk me through, you're a 14-year-old girl and you decide, probably, through a series of events, you decide like, this is what you want to do and you want to become an expert among experts. And how do you get from A to B? I mean, what was your learning process? Because I imagine you can't just go to graduate school for yoga theory, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I knew exactly what I wanted to do at the time. And I definitely didn't know that it would become this until, it's kind of evolved into this over the past 20 some years. Yeah, I definitely didn't set out to be here, but for me, it was always just an interest in health and wellness and helping people that kind of, really evolved a million times over along the way.
Right. How do you go about learning this stuff? Did you read a lot of books? Did you travel the world and learn, or?
For the yoga side of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, for the yoga side of it, back then there wasn't a lot of trainings and things you could do. I had books. I had a teacher. He's actually passed away now, but he was my first teacher, and he, introduced me to the practice and led me at the beginning. And, a lot of it was passed on by word of mouth. When I moved off to college when I was 16, there really weren't any yoga teachers that I knew of in the area. So I ended up going to a yoga teacher training, which there were a few at the time, but this was before the internet. So you couldn't really get on and Google. And I remember getting 2 or 3 pamphlets in the mail that I got to choose from. And I was a student. So one of them worked for my schedule, it being in the summertime. And I went, and that was kind of how it started. And I started teaching people. And, as you know, and as many people know, you learn a lot by teaching as well, by doing.
Definitely.
And so I've studied with a lot of different teachers over the years and done a lot of continuing education. For me, a lot of it, with my business now with yoga medicine, is really the fusion of East and West. So it's not necessarily just what I've learned with yoga teachers now, but a lot of it is the fusion of my experience with my patients, as well as in, sports medicine and orthopedics, and kind of where the two come together, which to me, I think is the beauty of it, is kind of the modernization of bringing the best of what we know now from looking at cadavers and looking at bodies and all of this modern day knowledge we have, and fusing it with this tradition of yoga, which is, thousands of years old, before we had cadavers, before we looked at anatomy, so that we can make it really relevant.
Absolutely. I was speaking with a friend the other day, and he said to me, he's like, what an amazing time that we live in, where, science is now looking into these ancient wisdoms that previous generations just had to go on faith. And we can say, hey, check out this new study, like meditation works and it changes the density of the brain by this percentage. And I think it's just an incredible gift that we don't even have to go on faith. I mean, so much of this stuff is now being proven and verified.
Absolutely. I think if you had told me 20 years ago that meditation would be where it is now, I definitely wouldn't have believed you.
Right.
It's great though.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to jump in at the yoga point and ask, I mean, I'm sure as with anything that's popular, there's a lot of misconceptions about yoga and what it is. So at its core, explain to me from kind of your perspective, in your words, what yoga is all about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you look at just the definition, yoga is union is what it means. And it's this idea of kind of union or bringing together of the mind and the body. You know, I think this is kind of what I alluded to when I first found yoga too, is this physicality with the mental practice, with this body awareness, or even potentially the spiritual practice of yoga, if that's part of the practice for you, is kind of this bringing together of our mind, body, and spirit in a way that, you know, we don't really see in the rest of the world. The rest of our world really is very disconnected. You know, we sit at our computer, we use our brains. It's so brain centric. You know, we go and we exercise and it's so body centric. You know, there's not a real time and a place to kind of bring these things together to power the intelligence of the brain with the intuition of the body and, you know, and the opposite. And so for me, yoga is this beautiful fusion of mind and body that, you know, we just don't see a lot in the rest of our lives. And for me, as a healthcare practitioner, it's been something that I find is really kind of fundamental and foundational to optimal health and well-being is this mind-body awareness and our ability to have that as a way to gauge whether we're competitive athletes or business place workers, you know, trying to perform our best or be more efficient. Being able to have this kind of this set point, this inner gauge, this mind-body experience is such a foundational part of being able to decide, should I push forward or do I need to do more? Do I need to back off? Is it, you know, a day that I really maybe should be resting instead of pushing harder as an athlete? Or, you know, how do I find ways to be more efficient just by simply listening and noticing how my body responds and reacts?
Right. I think that's really interesting. You know, one of the things I'm just thinking of, we talked about meditation, we talked about research. I'm really curious, you know, as we said, like researchers are now realizing the power of this ancient wisdom. What does research say about yoga? I mean, what has bubbled up to the surface in the last few years since it's kind of gone into the limelight?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because you were mentioning about meditation. In fact, you know, a lot of the research we see now, most of it, if you look at it, a lot of them are talking about yoga. Most of it is actually really simple pranayama or breathing practices and meditation practices. You know, the yoga research, actually, if you dig in there, is actually fairly limited still, what they're doing on the actual asanas and the physical practices. I think, you know, it's much harder to, you know, put in a little capsule and look at, you know, out of context because there are so many different styles and ways of doing it and many different practices. It can be much harder to encapsulate and really study and look at. But you know, there definitely are a lot more than there were. There's so many, anything from, you know, depression and, you know, there are some on learning and some in school systems that they've looked at in children and simple things like doing sometimes meditation and sometimes it's yoga before classes and the effects on their learning. Depression, you know, there have been some recently on diabetes and pain is obviously a big one. Motor control rehab, you know, there's a lot of them that are happening, but there's still, you know, most of the focus really is around the breathing practices and the meditation in general.
Interesting. Okay. So I want to ask, you know, we talked about the separation of the mind and body. So I'm going to ask kind of a devil's advocate kind of question, which is, you know, I meditate. And then on the other side, I go to the gym, you know, I do CrossFit, I stretch and stuff like that before my workout, so on and so forth, right? So what is it that yoga can offer me? Again, a devil's advocate question. What is it that yoga would offer me that doing those two practices separately would not offer me?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's two answers to that. I mean, I think some people would actually say, you know, if you're meditating and, you know, you're doing, you know, you're physically active and you're doing all those things that, you know, maybe yoga isn't necessarily that much more for you. I mean, I would argue, a lot of people in the traditional yoga sense would say, if you're able to meditate, that's all you need.
Right.
I would say from my more anatomical perspective, from a more Western sense, yoga is, obviously similar to stretching, but the difference in actual yoga practice where you're guided through, mindful body awareness and, this ability to be in your body in a different scenario than just meditating. Meditation, obviously, is a form of yoga. So, when we look at yoga at its core, this movement and the asanas, I mean, I think what we're talking about here is yoga as the asanas and the physical practice versus meditation as the seated practice. But, yoga and the asanas, the physical practice, should be an extension of that in that, it is more of a movement-based meditation. It may not be a meditation movement like something like Qigong or Tai Chi, where we see this very kind of meditative quality. It may be more fast, it may be static, it may be stretching, it may be strengthening, but there is a sense of the cohesion of the practice is in this sense of body awareness that really is, meant to be a part of any type of yoga. It really is kind of the foundation and the groundwork of it. So, learning how to, as an athlete, and maybe you do this already, but, learning how to have that mindfulness in, the way that you move can, translate into both how you move as a householder, as a normal human being, as well as an athlete, can be really important in kind of retraining muscle habits, retraining, how you move. Obviously, the elasticity component of it is really big, that isn't necessarily just stretching. I think a lot of people who are athletes, and again, I wouldn't know without watching you and really seeing what you're doing, where to draw the line between stretching and yoga. I think the mindfulness aspect of it is a big part of it. You go into a yoga practice, you get this kind of parasympathetic tone that you might not get when you're just stretching briefly, before and after a workout. You get, potentially maybe a little bit more elasticity in the muscles and, which we know is very important for the balance and integrity of the joints and,
right.
The long-term longevity on the joints as an athlete. So, it's hard to say without watching. I think a lot of people maybe do some yoga to some extent and maybe don't even recognize it.
Right. I think that's probably true. A lot of the breathing and holding these certain positions. I know I've definitely caught myself doing cat camels and stuff like that and downward facing dog before I do deadlift and stuff like that. And it's interesting how so many yogic movements have kind of imbued themselves into everyday aspects of every fitness regimen out there.
Yeah. And, I guess my point is that I don't necessarily think that everyone needs to be doing yoga in a yoga class. I think yoga is about a mindfulness and a body awareness and, a sense of balance. People think of yoga as just stretching, but in a typical yoga class, there's an element of strength and stability and stretching and breath awareness and
right.
relaxation, as well as maybe empowerment or, mental visualizations. There's so much to it that there's many different ways I think that you can bring yoga into your life. It doesn't have to be, a typical yoga class. And maybe many people are already doing that.
So that's an interesting point. Talking about the benefits, I think if I were in the audience right now, I would be asking myself, and folks who listen to the show are typically very self-improvement oriented and very interested in trying out new things. I would be asking myself, how do I know if this is something I should investigate? Like, what benefits should I be desiring, or what symptoms should I be experiencing to where I say, hey, yoga is probably something I really need to check out?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question for a lot of things that our medical system doesn't necessarily have the answer to. And I don't know that anyone has the answer to that. I think, with yoga, I think it is about, trying it. In my experience working with athletes a lot at the Nike headquarters, I think one thing that they've found is if I had told them some, magical way of knowing that, I don't know that it would have answered their question. But having gone to some classes and experienced it, I know that many of those athletes, found something that maybe they didn't even know that their bodies needed. And not necessarily as something even in words as much as a physical experience of the way they are in their bodies, the way they feel in their bodies, the way that they understand their bodies. For me, working with athletes, a big part of it is, obviously how they feel, getting them to feel better, preventing injuries, all of these important things as an athlete, but also just their ability to notice their bodies and to notice things that they didn't before. So, it's a tricky question, I think, to answer. In medicine, this is always the thing, is like, how do you know where to go? How do you know where to send someone? And, referrals, there's not always an easy way. I think health and wellness, and, especially if you're an athlete looking for, performance, is, it's a journey. And I recommend, with athletes, especially, trying it out and seeing, and just remembering, that there are many different ways and there are many different reasons. With my business, Yoga Medicine, we train teachers to really be able to work one-on-one with people, so that if they have injuries, or if they're training for something, or they're sick, or they're working with a doctor, that, they can really apply it in a very specific way for them, which you don't really get in a group class as much. You kind of get a very focused connection to the practice or purpose in the practice, and if you're working on things like that, I think it is helpful to probably work with someone individually. But there are many different reasons. You can go to yoga for better attention, better memory, better learning. You can go for better performance or muscle recovery, for athletes who aren't feeling like they're able to recover properly or quick enough, or are just looking to add new things to their training protocol to make them better athletes.
Right. You totally read my mind, because I was going to say, joint mobility, strength, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Like, are we missing any of the benefits? Heightened focus, heightened attention, really a ton of overlap with the other meditative benefits. And then I would argue decreased blood pressure, probably decreased cortisol. I haven't checked the research, but it's reasonable to assume. Are there any other kind of benefits that we're potentially missing? Increased digestive function, I know is something that's actually been shown, which is pretty interesting.
Cardiovascular function, anxiety, depression. I mean, whether you're an athlete or not, I think anxiety and depression are a big part of, influencing factors on the rest of our body and our health as well.
Totally. I just finished recording a course on testosterone and endocrine function. And just like this habit that we tend to use stress like we use coffee, and we tend to abuse both of them because they motivate us. Not super good for your endocrine system, it turns out. Like, pretty toxic way to live your life and end up with adrenal fatigue.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And I mean, along those lines, I think, yoga, a big part of it, what we see with the research of yoga, is the effects on, the parasympathetic, and, obviously within that, the effects on the adrenals and the endocrine system come as a result to, our ability to relax. The relaxation response is like any other muscle, in that, if you're constantly thriving on the stress, as you talk about, it becomes really difficult for us to relax. And so to build that up, it's just like going to the gym, only instead of lifting weights, you're learning to relax. And It becomes a response that needs to be retrained in the body.
Right. One of the most eye-opening episodes for me that we had Dr. Kirk Parsley on the show, and he talked about, HRV, heart rate variability. And just how, people who have, I always forget if it's parasympathetic or sympathetic, but people who have a more variable heart rate, therefore showing decreased stress response, are just better at everything, from shooting to handstands to marathons and everything in between. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of new research coming out in a lot of different directions that is, I think, teaching us all a lot.
Yeah. So I have a lot of friends who ask me about meditation. I've become a really big advocate of it. And the question people always ask, whether it's the speed reading classes or the meditation, they're like, okay, how much do I have to do before I actually feel a difference? And I always tell them with meditation, like 15 to 20 minutes a day for a month, you will start noticing a difference in your temperament. What about yoga? I mean, when do people start noticing a transformation in their body awareness, in their focus, in their attention?
Well, I think actually most people, when they go even to their first class, will experience an effect. I mean, obviously there's other things that can get in the way. Like sometimes your first class, you're so worried about sweating or what you're wearing or the person next to you. Sometimes that can get in the way. But for people who are able to just show up and kind of drop into it, I find, and depending on the class and the person, most people will feel an effect right away. Now, is that going to stay? Is that going to, last more than a few hours afterwards? Maybe, maybe not. But what I usually say to people is, you go and you do something, I mean, really anything, once a week, and you're constantly coming back to like that new starting point, or that same place. So to do something twice a week, you're kind of maintaining, you're kind of, able to kind of stay at that status quo and not be kind of coming back each time. 3, 4, 5 times a week. And obviously you're going to be making progress. Now, I don't necessarily believe that needs to be an hour and a half yoga class or even an hour yoga class. There's a lot of great online classes now where you can do a 20-minute or 30-minute yoga class.
Oh, cool.
I'm the same with meditation. Like, I don't believe that people have to be sitting for a half an hour, an hour. I think even 5 or 10 minutes, for people, that we've seen in research that 5 or 10 minutes for people can have a profound effect, months later, even potentially.
Absolutely.
So I don't think it needs to be a lot, but, for the nervous system and, this idea now of neuroplasticity, that we now understand that the nervous system can change, the most important part of that is that we're doing something regularly. So to me, it's not so much that people are doing it for long periods of time as much as that they're doing it regularly. When I started seeing patients, one thing I noticed really quickly was that the patients that I was seeing who were yoga students responded much quicker. They seemed to get better a lot faster. Their bodies were more resilient somehow. And so eventually a light went off in my head and I was like, oh, well, maybe I should give my patients who are not yoga students some yoga postures. And I started playing with it and noticing that, giving them these things to do on their own, whether it was meditation or breath work or yoga postures themselves, that they did get better a lot quicker. And so I started kind of using this concept of what I called yoga prescriptions. And it's one thing I use a lot with my teachers that I train is just a few poses. I rarely gave my patients more than 3 poses. In fact, it was usually more like 1 or 2 poses to do. Wow. And that the frequency was really the most important part of it. And using it as very specific things as an adjunct to their, whatever they were coming into me for. But, I think that that's the potency of it in my experience, is not that it needs to be a lot. At the beginning, as you're learning and you're just getting familiar with your body and how to relax, it can be really helpful to go, to a longer class or to maybe meet with someone privately for longer periods of time, once a week or so. But that, during the week, that frequency doesn't need to be very long. 20 minutes can be enough.
Amazing. It reminds me, we had an interview with the neuroscientist, Dr. Andrew Hill, who said, it doesn't matter how long you meditate, as long as you meditate every day or something like that. And it's so true. Like, even 5 minutes just makes all the difference in the world. You notice if you skip a day. Like, I had a blowout on Friday and I was like, oh man, I rushed through my morning and I was like, I'll do it tonight. And I just was so much more reactive than I should have been. Like, I apologize if the person out there who got the receiving email, I semi-apologize because you didn't deserve that,
That's funny. I mean, and it's true. I mean, in my book, I have people start with 3 minutes a day. So, I've seen research down as low as 3 minutes a day where they've looked at people meditating. It's, it doesn't take a lot, but, I'm the same. If I don't do it in the morning, it doesn't get done. You keep putting it off. And
I have a lot of views about Western medicine and very cynical views, especially about the pharmaceutical industry and stuff like that. And I'm a product of it, as we all are. And I've been medicated for different things throughout my life, as we all have been. But I just love that this 5,000-year-old practice comes along and is just and it's more effective than Ritalin, and it makes kids calm down, and it also reduces your blood pressure better than lovastatin. Boom, drop the mic. It's just fantastic to me. It's just,
it's nice when there's positive side effects.
Totally.
And there's a time and place for sure for the pharmaceuticals and the Western medicine, but it's nice. I mean, I think our first line of defense should be the simple things and the things that have the positive side effects.
I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. I wanted to ask you as well, just on a side note, do you both meditate and have a yogic practice, you personally speaking?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I meditate every morning, and that's, if I were to skip one of the two, it would probably be the yoga over the meditation.
Oh, wow.
I practice most days. I practice probably 6 days most weeks. Sometimes that's 30 minutes. Sometimes that's 2 hours.
2 hours of meditation?
Of yoga.
I was like, wow.
No, but most days my meditation is 20 to 30 minutes. I think for me, I'm busy like anyone else is. I don't know that there's anyone else on this world who's not busy and trying to squeeze everything in. For me, having that that more middle ground of a meditation practice of 20 to 30 minutes where I don't have to feel like, I'm limiting anything else or I can't fit it in, is really important to me. Something that's simple but long enough that I can really extract what I need.
Absolutely. And I think, I kind of want to mention that I feel like meditation gives you the same benefits as yoga, but it's actually a lot more difficult because The goal of meditation is like to focus on one thing, right? It's not to clear your mind as so many people think. And typically that's either a mantra or your breath or your heartbeat or the third eye. And as concentrating on things go, that's a lot more difficult than concentrating on the position of your body, when you're straining and it's hard and you're on one hand and one leg, in this kind of like warrior pose. That's pretty easy to focus on because there's discomfort associated and there's stretching sensations and stuff. So I almost feel like yoga is a really great entry level meditation.
Absolutely. And, that's traditionally how it was approached. The first step was, in a traditional practice, you modify some things in your lifestyle. There's these rules of nonviolence and contentment and all these kind of preliminary things. But really the first step is, the asana practice. It's the physical postures. And, one, that the physical postures are there to help you feel more comfortable in your body so that you can sit. But they're also there to help train that one pointed focus. As you mentioned, it's much easier, to focus in a yoga practice or a physical practice. And so in many ways, probably maybe the answer to your previous question too is, what are you missing? Well, the yoga can definitely help improve the meditation. It can definitely be more accessible for people who are new and much easier to attempt. And, in the traditional practice, it's the asanas, then it's the pranayama. So it's the breathing exercises then, which help to regulate the nervous system. The breath is the one part that can cross over the automatic and the controlled part of the nervous system. So a very important kind of gateway into our regulation of this nervous system, and as well as the parasympathetic and sympathetic, which is where we see a lot of the effects of the yoga practice coming, a lot of the research coming, and the meditation as well. So the pranayama is a kind of a more really specific way of working more deeply on the nervous system. And then, the last step is the meditation. And the meditation, in traditional practices was meant to bring you to a point where you can kind of experience that oneness and that wholeness in everything. And, I think as an athlete, you experience this, in some ways in moments as kind of that zone, as that place where, you feel very connected to yourself, as well as, in a more spiritual practice, this connection to, life and the world around us and our communities and people around us.
So that's really super interesting. I never knew. I always thought that there was this triad of Ayurveda, meditation, and yoga. I never knew that one was often used as a lead-in to the other. I think that's really, really interesting. That's something that should come up a lot more. Given how much we're all touting, I mean, everyone out there is touting meditation, but no one has stopped and said like, hey, this stuff's really, really freaking hard. You might want to start with, some yoga because it's hard. I always tell people like, it is so hard. It sounds like, Sam Harris has this really nice post about it. And he's like, I'll explain to you how to meditate, but it's like explaining tightrope walking with stand on the line, walk, don't fall. It's like, there's so much nuance to what you need to do.
It's so true. It's like the yoga itself, the asanas can be so complex in different styles now, and alignment and anatomy. And, it really is a physical therapy in many ways. And yet, then you get to the pranayama, the breath control, which is much simpler. And then you get to the meditation. It's like, not just sit.
Right.
It is. It's hard. I think nowadays, that's a very much the traditional view of it, this progression. And nowadays, a lot of people don't necessarily use that. I don't necessarily always start people with yoga. I think for some people, meditation can be an easier way to sneak it in. At least all they have to do is sit. They don't have to get on yoga clothes and do things and find a place to go. And it can be more accessible in some ways. So I don't think it has to be approached that way. But for people who struggle with meditation, I definitely think yoga can be a great gateway into that. Yeah,
absolutely. So Tiffany, I wanted to ask you as well, acupuncture. I know, you have this knowledge of all things kind of Eastern and Western, it sounds like. Where does acupuncture fit in? I've kind of really become super interested in this idea of chi and energies. I've had a couple really super intense experiences in the last few months that have given me a lot more faith in it. So I kind of wanted to open that conversation up.
Yeah, I mean, my best explanation, I think, and this is a very general sense, there's this idea in Chinese medicine, and obviously it's a very, very intricate system. You go to Chinese medicine school for 4 years, kind of like you would for Western medicine. So, to overly simplify it, it's this idea in Chinese medicine that, our bodies are, made to be able to heal and repair themselves. There's all these, as we know in a Western sense as well, these checks and regulations built into it. And so the meridians are these energy pathways through the body. You can think of them like rivers, like tributaries through the body, delivering nutrients, not too unlike the blood circulation, even though they are very separate in Chinese medicine. But there's this idea that the body knows how to heal itself. And when there is this kind of free flow of qi or energy in the body, as well as blood through the body, that the body can heal and repair, that it's able to do that. When there becomes an obstruction or blockage, whether that's from someone punching you or falling or torn muscle, or, these blockages can also come up as emotional causes as well that can create these blockages on a more energetic level. But that when there's a blockage that the body is maybe potentially not able to heal that or repair that, maybe there's pain, maybe there's discomfort, it can also affect the organs. These meridians are, the surface meridians that we look at. There's many different meridians in the body, but there are meridians that lie on the surface, which is what we needle in acupuncture. But these meridians also dive into the organs, deeply into the body. And so they communicate and connect with the organs. And so even these surface meridians, which might seem very much like you're needling the muscles, the fascia, or the skin, also communicate with the organs. So, the acupuncture is done. There's hundreds of points, you study for many years to figure out how to utilize it. But, wow. It's kind of like tuning that system so that your body can do what it's good at. This implication that our bodies do know how to heal. And, this ability to kind of recreate balance within the body so that it can do what it's good at.
That's fascinating. And what else I wonder is, it's so interesting when there's kind of this congruence. And I've heard a lot about chakras and stuff like that in the Hindu kind of thought process and tradition. Is there commonality between that and the Chinese idea of qi?
There's not a perfect correlation. I would say, there's definitely overlap in, the Indian system. We see this idea of nadis as kind of similar to the energy channels and points in the acupuncture system, though, acupuncture was really, though some people will talk about, we do see there was some acupuncture being done in India, for the majority of it, started to originate in China. So, we don't talk about it in correlation to acupuncture as much, but there is still this idea of energy centers. The chakras, themselves, specifically the 7 chakras in the body that run along the spine, I wouldn't say that there's a really exact correlation in Chinese medicine. There are some small overlaps, but this idea that the body is made up of energy centers, and really in Chinese medicine, we look at the meridians and there are these maybe 500 or hundreds of points, but even beyond that, the idea is that there's energy everywhere, and the same is true in Indian, in the Ayurvedic system, is that there's these nadis and there's the chakras, which are kind of really great energy centers, just big hubs you could think of, but that there are these smaller energy centers really everywhere in the body. So there's definitely some overlap, and I'm not an expert in, the Indian side, the Ayurvedic side of that specifically, but, there definitely is overlap, though they are still very different.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Like I said, I've had some very recent kind of transformative experiences involving energies and flows of energy. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, I don't even know what to look in Google. Where can I go about learning more about things like qi and acupuncture? Are there any kind of resources that you would recommend checking out?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of books, and there's probably some newer ones too that I'm not familiar with, but the traditional ones, there's a couple for people who are interested. One is called The Web That Has No Weaver, which is a great one. It definitely gives a little bit more detail than maybe some people might want, but it's kind of the book that they usually recommend for people considering going into Chinese medicine. There's another one more on kind of the more energetic side of it called Between Heaven and Earth, which is a great one for more of the more esoteric, more emotional connections, different character, personality types, and things like that.
Amazing.
So those are good references. Obviously, you can find a lot of information on the internet. I think one of my favorite descriptions for qi is this idea that it's really energy on the verge of materializing. So it's this sensation of energy inside of us before it actually creates a movement or an articulation, which is why it has been so hard to research and really pinpoint and find. We really haven't been able to nail it down exactly what this energy thing is yet. We found a lot of suggestions, but, it's the reason why we can't really kind of look at it specifically.
Right. And, I'm sure there's someone in the audience saying like, wow, this sounds like a lot of woo woo. But my big realization with this was just the idea. I've been reading a little bit about like quantum mechanics and a little bit about physics. And I came to this realization that like all matter is energy, as are we. And therefore, energy can influence energy the same way that dropping an ice cube into boiling hot water can make it stop boiling. And that was my kind of huge realization is like, oh my God, if we're energy, we can be influenced by the energy of others. And we might call that emotions, the limbic system, pheromones. But like when you're really happy and someone is really, really angry, there is a flow of energy by whatever mechanism you want to call it. And there's a meeting of those energies. And I just had this huge epiphany around that.
And there's so much information, I feel like, coming out on that, in particular on quantum mechanics and quantum physics right now about, our bodies and, this energy concept of the bodies that we're still really figuring out, but is definitely an area of growth for sure.
Definitely. I actually wanted to ask you, are there any kind of studies or any recent publications that you would point me to kind of learn more about this and kind of tie back this experience that I had to reality?
Gosh, not anything that comes to mind right off of hand, but there's definitely always things coming up. Yeah, I don't have anything right off the top of my head for you.
Fair enough. We can keep in touch and chat about it and pass articles back and forth. Tiffany, I wanted to ask you, who are your gurus and who do you look up to and admire?
I think that's a tricky question. I feel like for me, in the yoga world, there tends to be this kind of tradition of being taught one person to another. And in my experience, there's so much information out there to learn from. I feel like for me personally, because I am such a fusion of more of the tradition with the modern aspect, I feel like I learned something from really everyone who's empowered to, push themselves to learn more, to do better, to be better, to help their communities, to serve their communities. There's some great yoga teachers out there doing great things. Gary Kraftstow is kind of a pioneer in the yoga therapeutics. Sean Korn is definitely someone I admire for her activism and all that she does in that realm as a yoga teacher. And then, everything in between, my family, my friends, I think everyone is really such a source of inspiration as you look at people each contributing what they're good at. I don't think, in my opinion, that there's one thing that's better than the other. As we live together. We survive based on, the people bringing us our water and the people taking away our trash and the scientists who learn and inspire us. So yeah, I think, the guru, the teacher, I think is one both inside of each of us. We learn from our own experience as well as, everything around us. I don't know that there's one answer to that for me.
Fair enough. I love that answer. I'm all about learning and accelerated learning. And one of the things we teach in our course is this idea of brute force learning and how to take in information from as many sources as possible and not just read one book, not just watch, videos on YouTube, but really diverse sources, read the opinion and the counter opinion kind of holistic learning approach. So I can totally respect that there's no one guru who comes to mind. Tiffany, I know we're coming up on time here. Wanted to ask you, second to last question here. If people want to learn more about you, check out your work, check out your books. I'm sure we'll link the books in the blog episode, but where can people learn more about you and reach out to you?
Yeah, it's just yogamedicine.com. And we also have a link on there, a page to find a teacher where you can link up with a teacher if you're looking for someone to study within a group as well as privates. We've worked really hard on it recently, actually, so you can see exactly what they've trained in with us, so that if you have a shoulder injury, you can find someone who's studied the shoulder module with us or the Chinese medicine module. So that's a great resource for people looking to learn more or to study yoga. And then we have a blog on there and all sorts of other resources.
Fantastic. So I'll ask you our last question that we always like to close on, which is if people take away just one lesson from this episode and they carry it with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that lesson to be?
I would say focus on the small things. I think nowadays we tend to focus on the big things and the things that we can create and see benefits from. But the small things, both, as far as the nervous system goes and yoga and meditation, as well as in our lives, the small things that we do with, presence and purpose in our lives, I think really are the ones that create the big changes, both in ourselves as well as our communities.
That's a fantastic note to end on, Tiffany. I want to thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And I definitely learned a ton. I'm sure our audience did as well. And I do hope we keep in touch.
Thanks, Jonathan. It was great to be here.
Awesome. Well, take care and have a wonderful, wonderful day or evening. I'm not actually sure where you are.
You as well.
Take care. All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody or you are somebody or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingasuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.